I am a doctor who got fired for calling an overweight patient fat. If you love hearing about other people's experience, be sure to subscribe. It really helps. They don't teach you in medical school that truth can be a career-ending liability. 10 years, $300,000 in student loans, and 20,000 hours of training, all to become a doctor who patients claim to want honesty from, until the moment that honesty doesn't coddle their feelings or validate their beliefs. I didn't become a physician to sugarcoat medical realities or pretend that feelings supersede physiology. I became a doctor to heal people, which first requires acknowledging what's actually wrong. But as I've learned at tremendous professional cost, in today's healthcare environment, medical truth is often the first casualty when it collides with a patient's preferred narrative. My name is Dr. Thomas Walsh. Until 6 months ago, I was a respected attending physician at one of the top hospitals in the Pacific Northwest. Now I'm rebuilding my practice in Vienna, Austria, where medical directness is considered a professional virtue rather than grounds for termination. The journey from there to here wasn't what I'd planned, but when your choices are between professional exile or compromising the oath you took, sometimes exile is the only ethical option. The incident that began my downfall happened on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. I was running behind schedule, already frustrated by a night of electronic health record notifications and an EMR system that had crashed twice that morning. My 10:30 appointment was with a returning patient, a 43-year-old woman with uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and osteoarthritis in both knees. Her lab results from the previous week showed dangerously elevated blood glucose levels and concerning kidney function markers. When I entered the exam room, she was scrolling through her phone, a half-eaten package of cookies on the counter beside her. Her weight had increased by 17 pounds since her last visit 3 months earlier. "Good morning," I said, sitting down and pulling up her chart. "I've reviewed your labs from last week, and I'm concerned. Your A1C has risen to 9.8, which indicates your diabetes is poorly controlled. Your kidney function tests are also showing early signs of damage." She nodded absently, still looking at her phone. "Yeah, I've been stressed. Work's been crazy. Can you just increase my medication?" I took a deep breath. I'd been treating this patient for nearly 2 years, and we'd had this conversation multiple times. Each visit, I gently suggested lifestyle modifications. Each visit, she'd acknowledged them, but made no changes. Each visit, her health markers had worsened. "I can adjust your medications," I said, "but that's not addressing the root problem. You're significantly overweight, and that's exacerbating your diabetes, your hypertension, and your knee pain. The additional 17 pounds you've gained is putting you at serious risk for heart attack, stroke, and kidney failure." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Did you just call me fat?" I said you're significantly overweight, which is a medical assessment based on your BMI of 38.6 and your body fat percentage. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about your health. Your weight is medically dangerous." Her face flushed crimson. "I can't believe this. You're fat-shaming me. I came here for medical help, not to be insulted." "I'm not shaming you," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I'm giving you a medical diagnosis. Your weight is causing serious health complications that medication alone cannot solve. If we don't address this aggressively, you're looking at insulin dependency, possible dialysis, and potentially life-threatening cardiac events." She stood up abruptly, gathering her purse. "I want a different doctor. One who doesn't discriminate against plus-size patients." "This isn't discrimination," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "This is medicine. Your weight is killing you, and pretending otherwise would be malpractice." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sighed, documented the encounter, and moved on to my next patient, assuming this would blow over as previous difficult conversations had. I was wrong. By that afternoon, she had filed a formal complaint with the hospital administration, claiming I had been verbally abusive, had fat-shamed her, and had created a hostile healthcare environment. She'd also posted a scathing 1-star review online, describing me as cruel, judgmental, and triggering. The next morning, I was called into my department chair's office. Dr. Keller, a man who had once been a mentor but had gradually transformed into a bureaucratic guardian of the hospital's public image, looked grim. "Tom, we have a situation," he said, sliding a printout of the complaint across his desk. "This is serious. The patient is threatening legal action for emotional distress and discrimination." I scanned the document, which bore little resemblance to the actual conversation. "This isn't what happened," I said. I told her directly but professionally that her weight was causing serious health problems. "That's not discrimination, it's medicine." Dr. Keller removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The modern healthcare environment is complex. Patient satisfaction impacts our funding, our rankings, and our reputation. We need to consider the patient's emotional well-being alongside their physical health, even when that emotional well-being is based on dangerous denial." I asked, "She's killing herself with food, and I'm supposed to ignore that to avoid hurting her feelings?" You could have approached it more sensitively, he suggested. Use more neutral language. Focused on health-promoting behaviors rather than weight specifically. I stared at him in disbelief. She's not coming to me for therapy. She's coming to me for medical care. Pretending her obesity isn't the primary driver of her health problems would be professionally negligent. The conversation ended with me being required to attend a patient communication workshop and write a letter of apology to the patient. I refused the latter, which earned me a formal reprimand in my file. This incident might have remained isolated if not for what happened 3 weeks later. I was covering the pediatric emergency department during a staff shortage when a 15-year-old patient came in with severe abdominal pain. The intake form indicated a female patient, but the teenager had introduced themselves as Alex and used he/him pronouns. The parents had corrected this immediately, insisting on using their child's birth name and female pronouns. The physical examination and ultrasound revealed a concerning ovarian torsion, a twisted ovary that required immediate surgical intervention to prevent tissue death and preserve fertility. When I explained the diagnosis and treatment plan to the family, using clinical terms like ovarian torsion and female reproductive anatomy, the situation quickly escalated. You need to stop calling it that, the patient said, clearly distressed. I'm not a girl. I don't have female anatomy. I'm a boy. The father interjected forcefully. He's confused. She's a girl. Treat her like one. The mother added, we don't recognize this transgender nonsense. She was born a girl. Her name is Alexis, not Alex. I took a moment to consider my approach, acutely aware of the tension in the room and the patient's mounting distress. I understand this is a difficult situation, I said carefully. However, medically speaking, I'm dealing with a patient who has ovaries, a uterus, and fallopian tubes. One of those ovaries is twisted and cutting off its blood supply. This requires immediate surgical intervention regardless of gender identity. I turned to the patient directly. Alex, I respect how you identify. But I need to be medically accurate about the organs involved to provide proper treatment. This doesn't invalidate who you are. The parent's faces hardened. The father pointed a finger at me. You will not encourage this delusion. You will treat our daughter as a girl, or we'll find another doctor. Finding another doctor would delay necessary emergency surgery, I explained. Your child has a condition that could lead to permanent tissue damage within hours. As for how I address the patient, I'm going to use medically accurate terminology while being respectful of everyone's concerns. The situation deteriorated from there. The parents demanded a different physician, which wasn't possible given the staffing shortage and the urgency of the situation. I had to get consent for the surgery, which the parents were now threatening to withhold unless I stopped validating delusions. In the end, I focused solely on the medical emergency at hand. Your child has a twisted ovary that will die without immediate surgery. This could lead to infection, sepsis, and even death. It will certainly lead to the loss of the ovary and potentially impact future fertility options. I need your consent to operate now. They reluctantly signed the forms, but immediately after the successful surgery, they filed a complaint alleging I had pushed a transgender agenda and undermined parental authority. The hospital administration called me in again, this time with a representative from the legal department present. The parents are threatening to sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress and violation of their parental rights, the lawyer explained. They claim you deliberately used language that undermined their family values and caused their daughter confusion and distress. I used medically accurate language to describe a medical emergency, I replied. The patient has ovaries. One was twisted. That's not ideology, it's anatomy. But you used the name and pronouns the patient requested against the parent's explicit wishes, the department chair pointed out. That crossed a line from medical necessity into personal belief. I attempted to respect everyone while focusing on the medical emergency, I said. Would you prefer I had deliberately misgendered a suicidal teenager during a medical crisis? Studies show that transgender youth have exponentially higher suicide rates when their identity is rejected. That's not the point, the lawyer interjected. The point is that as a minor, the parents have legal authority over their child's care, including how they're addressed. So medical ethics take a back seat to parental preferences? I asked. What if they demanded I address their child as worthless or stupid? Would I be obligated to use those terms too? The meeting ended with another reprimand and a mandatory referral to the hospital's ethics committee. I was also removed from the pediatric emergency rotation pending review. These two incidents created a reputation. I became known among administrators as difficult and lacking sensitivity. Among some colleagues, however, I became something of a quiet hero, the doctor who still prioritized medical truth over political correctness. Several approached me privately to express support, though none would do so publicly for fear of similar repercussions. The final incident that led to my departure involved an elderly patient with stage 4 lung cancer. He had been a heavy smoker for over 50 years and was now facing a terminal diagnosis. His family had requested that I not mention smoking as a cause of his cancer, as it made him feel guilty, and they wanted to focus on positive energy for healing. During our consultation, I reviewed his treatment options, which at that stage were primarily palliative. When he asked me directly about his prognosis, I told him the truth. His cancer was terminal, likely giving him 3 to 6 months. I also confirmed when he asked that his smoking history was almost certainly the primary cause. His daughter exploded. "We specifically asked you not to bring that up. What good does it do now? You're just making him feel worse." "Your father asked me directly," I replied. "I won't lie to my patients, even with good intentions." The elderly man reached for his daughter's hand. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I've known for years what I was doing to myself. I'd rather hear the truth, even if it's hard." Despite the patient himself expressing appreciation for my honesty, his family filed yet another complaint. This time, the hospital administration gave me an ultimatum: take a leave of absence to reflect on my communication approach or face termination proceedings. I chose a third option. I resigned. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, betrayal, uncertainty, and eventually clarity. I had entered medicine to help people, which sometimes meant telling them difficult truths. If I couldn't practice that way, perhaps I needed to practice elsewhere. A former colleague who had relocated to Vienna suggested I consider Europe, where medical directness was more culturally accepted. After extensive research and numerous conversations with physicians practicing abroad, I made the decision to relocate. The credentialing process was arduous, requiring additional examinations and verification of my qualifications. My German was rusty from college courses, necessitating intensive language study. But 10 months after my resignation, I began practicing at a hospital in Vienna. The cultural difference was immediately apparent. During my first week, I observed a senior physician telling an obese patient almost exactly what I had told mine, that her weight was medically dangerous and required immediate intervention. The patient nodded, asked questions about specific dietary changes, and scheduled a follow-up. No complaints, no accusations of fat shaming, just an adult conversation about medical reality. In a case conference, I heard physicians discussing a transgender teenage patient, using the patient's preferred name and pronouns, while also being medically precise about anatomy and physiology. Neither the medical accuracy nor the respect for the patient's identity was seen as contradictory or controversial. When I mentioned my experiences in the U.S. to my new colleagues, they were baffled. "But how can you treat patients properly if you cannot speak honestly about their condition?" one asked. Another added, "Medicine is not about making people feel good in the moment. It is about healing them, which sometimes requires difficult conversations." 6 months into my new position, I received an email from a former patient, the elderly man with lung cancer. His daughter had tracked down my new contact information to let me know he had passed away. To my surprise, she apologized for her reaction to my honesty. "Dad talked about you often in his final months," she wrote. "He said you were the only doctor who respected him enough to tell him the truth. He used that truth to make peace with his life and his choices. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Thank you for giving him that gift, even when we tried to stop you." That email hangs framed in my office now, a reminder of why I became a doctor in the first place. Not to win popularity contests or protect people from difficult realities, but to help them navigate those realities with dignity and autonomy. Sometimes that means being the bearer of unwelcome news. Sometimes it means saying things that make people temporarily uncomfortable for their long-term benefit. Medicine isn't about validating every belief or protecting every feeling. It's about health, healing, and sometimes hard truths. I lost a prestigious position and uprooted my life because I refused to compromise on that principle. But in doing so, I found a place where I can practice medicine as it should be practiced, with honesty, respect, and the courage to say what needs to be said. Patients don't need another friend who tells them what they want to hear. They need a doctor who tells them what they need to know, even when, especially when, it's difficult to hear. That's the oath I took, and that's the oath I'll keep, regardless of where I practice. The irony isn't lost on me that I had to leave the land of the free to freely practice honest medicine. But perhaps that's the nature of truth. It remains true regardless of its popularity, and sometimes finding the freedom to speak requires extraordinary measures. I don't regret my honesty, even with its professional consequences. What I regret is practicing in a system that increasingly views patients as customers to be pleased rather than people to be healed, where hospital administrators value satisfaction surveys over medical outcomes, and where doctors are penalized for prioritizing long-term health over momentary comfort. My new colleagues sometimes ask if I miss home. The truth is, I miss what I thought American medicine was, a field dedicated to healing through knowledge, skill, and honest communication. I don't miss what it was becoming, a customer service industry where medical truth is subordinate to patient preference and institutional risk management. Here in Vienna, I've found what I was looking for all along, the freedom to be a doctor in the truest sense. To help people by telling them the truth, even when that truth is difficult. To treat them as adults capable of handling reality rather than children who need protection from it. To practice medicine rather than performative kindness. Some might call my approach cold or lacking compassion. I would argue that true compassion isn't about making people feel good in the moment. It's about helping them become healthier in the long run. Sometimes that requires a momentary discomfort, the sting of a vaccination, the burn of physical therapy, or yes, the emotional impact of hearing an unvarnished medical truth. As physicians, we cannot control how patients respond to truth. We can only control whether we offer it. I choose to offer it, whatever the professional cost. Because in the end, I'd rather be the doctor who lost his job for telling the truth than the one who kept it by telling comfortable lies. Medicine isn't about being liked. It's about being trusted. And trust, like healing, can only be built on a foundation of truth. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more, consider subscribing, as it really helps.